Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's me, your nurse again. Hope everybody is doing great and doing fine. This is my break time because I'm on night shift, so I decided to put up this video because in the last couple of days I've been getting so many questions from friends, especially nurses, about how they can actually migrate to Canada and be working as a nurse. So there are some basic steps you need to take first before you can start practicing as nurses in Canada, and that is why I just need to quickly run through those steps so you can actually get informed. So the first step you need to take as international nurses is to register yourself with a body called NNAS in Canada, and the full meaning of NNAS is National Nursing Assessment Service. So this body has actually been created for international students. As long as you had your nursing outside of Canada, it is compulsory for every international student to pass through this body. So whether you have studied in Zealand, Australia, USA, UK, Nigeria, Ghana, you have to pass through this body. It is compulsory. And this is the very first step you need to take, because this body is an evaluation body. Like, you've studied outside of Canada. Now they want to evaluate you to see whether your program, whether your nursing education back home is comparable to Canadian standard. And that is why it is very compulsory for everybody, every nurses, to pass through this body. So once you've made up your mind to come to Canada, whether you are already in Canada or you are planning, you have to start your application with this NNAS body. And after you've opened this application, you make a payment of $650. This might be different depending on the country where you are residing currently. Like, you have to change it to the to your own country value. So, but the standard amount is $650. So after you have made this payment, then you will be eligible to download 3 basic forms, because you need these 3 forms to request for some documents from your country where you've had your nursing. The very first document you download is your work experience form. This work experience form is just a form that you have to give to your manager at work, your CNO, your ACNO, depending on what you call them in your place of work. They just have to fill out this form and send it from your place of work directly to NNAS. You don't send it by yourself, please. Your employer has to send it from their place of work, from your own place of work, to NNAS directly in Canada. The other form you need to download is your RN license verification form. You know you've been practicing in your country. So these people, NNAS actually want to evaluate. They want to see truly if you've been registered in your country. So this one, you send it to Nursing and Midwifery Council of Nigeria if you are in Nigeria. But if you are residing in another country, you also have to send this form to your regulatory body. And when they are done with the filling, they also send it directly back to NNAS in Canada. And the third form is your education verification form. If you have done your nursing, your midwifery, public health nursing, bachelor's of nursing science, master's, PhD, any course you've had back home that is related to nursing, you have to request for your academic transcript plus curriculum. Please, I repeat, not only transcripts, you need both your transcripts and your curriculum. If you don't state it clearly for your school, and your school only have to send transcripts, by the time NNAS is evaluating your application, they will identify it as an error and they will reject it. Then, it will bring a kind of setback for your application, and at the same time, it will incur another financial cost, another financial burden on you. So please, by the time you're asking for your transcript from school, ensure you mention it to them that you need both the transcript and the curriculum. So by the time you've requested for all these three things, your work experience, your education transcript, and your verification of your RN license from your country, after you've sent all of these three things to NNAS, plus some other minor things like minor documents. For instance, if you are married and you've done change of name, NNAS also wants you to provide proof of proof that shows truly that you've changed your name. So this one will have to be done by a notary officer, not just ordinary person. You can actually send these by yourself. So after you have sent in all these documents, then you sit down and you relax, meaning that you wait for about 4 to 6 months for NNAS to check through your application to see if everything you've submitted is what they needed. So between this 4 to 6 months, your application status will be changing. Like initially, it will be like waiting for initial documents. So those are the time you are sending in your education transcript, your license verification, your work experience form, and all other things. So by the time they've received everything, then your application will move from waiting from initial document to ready for review, meaning they've started reviewing your application to see if all the documents are okay, they are correct, your name is okay, there's no error in your name, no error in your transcript, everything is set. Then your application will now move again from ready from review to ready for final review. When I say final review, it means NNAS is now ready to make their judgment based on what you've submitted. So let's assume you've only had your RN, I mean just this 3 years diploma course. By the time they are giving their report, you should expect something like not comparable, because of course, you know, just 3-year diploma in your country can never be commensurate to Canadian education standard. But if you are lucky, you've had your nursing, post-basic, a lot of time doesn't really count. What really counts is your RN, BNSC, Masters, and all of those. But if you are combining so many diplomas, RN, RM, RPHN, RPON, my dear, they are all diplomas. They don't really count. So by the time they are making their judgment, basically they make 3 judgments, like they give 3 reports. And the first one is they might say your education from your country is comparable to Canadian standard, meaning maybe you've done so many programs, you've done your master's, you've done your PhD, or possibly you've studied in developed country. I mean developed countries such as US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. All of those are developed countries, so they really believed the standard of their education there will a lot of time be comparable to Canadian standard. But if you studied in country where I came from, like Nigeria, a lot of time you get not comparable. So the first result that you might likely get is comparable to Canadian standard. The second result that you might get is somewhat. When I say somewhat, it means your education from your country is getting close to Canadian standard, like a little bit closer. So you just need few bridging courses, or you might need just kind of OSCE exam just to bridge that little gap before they can now allow you to go and write your final exam, which is the Nclex. But if you've gotten not comparable as your result, my dear, it means you have to go back to school a lot of time. I'm not saying everybody goes to school. In my own case, I got not comparable as my report for RN and somewhat comparable for LPN. But at the end of the day, I did not have to go back to school because I choose another province that is so lenient with international students. So I'll still be discussing on those areas very well. So by the time you now get this report, whether comparable, not comparable, somewhat comparable, then you have to now move this report. You port it to the province of your choice. What I mean by this is you've gotten your report from NNAS. That is just the end of that stage. That body is only for you to get your report to see the level where you belong to before you now proceed to the second stage. But before I proceed to the second stage, I need to stress this, that by the time you are creating your application, please don't just add RN, registered nurse only. Always add another RN like LPN. What I mean by this is, a lot of time people doesn't know. They just want them to evaluate them for only RN because they've been an RN from back home. But a lot of time people doesn't get comparable reports for RN, but they tend to get somewhat comparable for LPN. Somebody might be wondering, what is the difference between LPN and RN? Both of them are nurses. But the only difference is when it comes to the scope of practice. Let me give you an instance so that you can actually understand what I mean by this. So for an RN, when you are both at work, if you have a new admission now, they always want a registered nurse to attend to the new admission first. Even though LPN might also have his or her own assessment to do, but at that very point in time, they want an RN to do the initial assessment. Then, after she's done with her own findings, LPN can also go there and do. Another example is if you have a patient on the ward and there's need for blood transfusion, they always want a registered nurse to do the blood transfusion process. They don't want LPN to come close to anything that has to do with vein, anything IV medication, IV infusion, IV transfusion. They don't want them to come close to it. It's just kind of scope of practice. So that is just the little difference. So by the time you're adding your application at the beginning, please always add LPN and RN, so that at the end of the day, if you don't get a report for RN initially, you can at least get somewhat comparable for LPN, and you'll be able to write your final exam, which they call REX PN. For LPN, they write REX PM, which means regulated exam for practical nurses, while RN writes Nclex for their home final exam. So at least by the time you are working as LPN, you can be bridging other courses to make you qualify to write your Nclex RN. So that's just for NNAS application. Now, let's move to the second stage. The second stage is porting of your report that you've gotten from NNAS to your province. By the time you are creating your application with NNAS, I always advise people, please don't add one province. That was one of the errors I made when I was doing my application. I never knew I can add as many provinces as possible. I only added one. And because I didn't meet up with the requirements that time, it made me stay for 3 years until I get to know that I can add other provinces. Now, there's a good news. Before, it is compulsory for all international students at NNAS level to provide proof of English exam, either in form of IELTS or CELBA. But now, since October 15th, 2022, they have removed these requirements, although temporarily. What I mean by this is, at NNAS level, they have removed provision of English at this stage so that people can actually get their reports without their application getting expired. But by the time they are now porting, by the time they are now migrating from NNAS to their regulatory body is now unique. What I mean by this is, if regulatory body A says we don't need English, another regulatory body might say we need English. I will give you a good example of that. In my own situation, the regulatory actually I registered with 3 regulatory bodies. One of them made it compulsory for me to provide English, which I wasn't able to meet. The other one says, I can meet this requirement if I've been working as personal support worker, I mean healthcare assistant, for at least 2 years. Then I've been working as healthcare assistant, so I was able to provide a recommendation letter from my employer. That is for another one. Then for the third province, which I had, those people did not even require me to provide English because they've seen that I was actually taught in English language from my country. So what I'm saying in essence is always had more than a province when you are making your application. So by the time you are done with your report, you just have to send it, you move it, you port it from NNAS to your regulatory body. You might have made up your mind you are going to Ontario, you are going to New Brunswick, you are going to Newfoundland and Labrador, you are coming to Alberta. Whichever province of your choice you've made up your mind to stay or to reside, now you have to port these reports to this regulatory body. And this regulatory body will now further assess the reports that you've gotten. So these people will now make their own decision, and decision here is individualized based on individual province policy. Every province has their own policy. They have their own requirements. They have their own recommendation. Like, it's unique at this stage. So by the time they now make further evaluation, further assessment of the results you are bringing in, they will now make final decision to see if you are eligible to go and write the final exam, which is the Nclex. Now I will simplify it for you to understand better. If you are choosing province, I always advise people to choose province like number 1, New Brunswick. Another province I always advise people to choose is Ontario, College of Nurses of Ontario. And the third province I always advise people to choose is Newfoundland and Labrador. These 3 provinces are so lenient to international students. They are lenient with them when it comes to their decision making. Because let me give you an example. For New Brunswick, as of today, I've told you, you might likely, you will always get 3 reports, comparable, somewhat, and not comparable. Even if at all you've gotten not comparable reports, under normal circumstances, you're supposed to go back to school to do some bridging programs before you can now be eligible to write your board exam. But this body, lot of time, gives 2 options. And the first option is, they will say in their email, do you think you can challenge the Nclex exam within 6 months if we give you 2 attempts? Or do you think you want to go back to school to do bridging? So this now depends on you. If you feel you are well prepared to challenge the exam, then you can reply them back in the email that you want to challenge the exam. And you have to pass within 6 months, because they will give you 2 attempts, so that if you fail the first attempt, you can go the second attempt. But if you eventually fail in the 2 attempts, then you have to go back for bridging before you can now be qualified to receive another authorization to test for your Nclex. You see, this province is so nice, so lenient with international students. And if you've gotten somewhat as well, they still give you this option. And if you've gotten comparable, that means straight away you are eligible to write your board exam. Now that is for New Brunswick. For Ontario, they call their regulatory body College of Nurses of Ontario. So for this body as well, they are so nice, they are so wonderful. And here are their benefits. Recently now, because it's a big province, so they've actually come up with a new development, because like I said, it's a big province, and meaning they really need a lot of health workers in that area. So before, you have to go for bridging or you go for OSCE before you can be eligible to write Nclex RN if you've gotten not comparable or somewhat comparable for RN. But just this last month, October, they came up with another thing. If you have gotten your report from NNAS, This body is now giving all international students 2 years to go and be working temporarily as nurses. But they expect you to write your Nclex and pass within 2 years. So you see, this is kind of a benefit. But if you have not done your NNAS evaluation, you won't be eligible for this, my dear. So now for College of Nurses of Ontario, if you've gotten somewhat comparable for your LPN, these people will ask you to go and challenge the Nclex, the Rex PN exam. But if you've gotten somewhat comparable for RN as your evaluation results, these people will ask you to go and do some little bridging courses, or you have to do OSCE. And if you have gotten not comparable at all, not comparable for RN and LPN, then you need bridging courses as well, because it is not comparable. And that is why I say regulatory body, they are different when it comes to their final decision making. But here is one good deal about College of Nurses of Ontario. I will divert a little bit, but I'll still make sure you really understand what I'm saying. If you have the financial capacity, I always advise people, if you have the financial capability and you think you can actually explore another route, it's always good to go through US route. You know, when I was mentioning NNAS initially, it's an evaluation body, but only Canada use NNAS, while US use CGFNS. So if you have the financial capability and you are able to create an application with CGFNS, you get your education transcript evaluated with CGFNS, and CGFNS gives you authorization to test for your Nclex RN from the states. If you pass, my dear, it is just automatic in Canada, because both Canada, USA, and Australia will write the same Nclex RN exam. So irrespective of where you've passed, whether Canada, whether US, whether Australia, you will still be regarded as registered nurse. So if you get authorization to write your Nclex RN from United States of America, all you just need to do for CNO in Ontario is just to transfer the report of your result to them, and you automatically become a Canadian RN. But that is if you have the financial capability. Of course, it is not too much expensive, because it's really worth it. You can imagine if you are able to clear it from US and you just transfer to Canada without you having to go for bridging courses. Which one do you think is much better? To me, I think exploring US route, pass from US, just bringing your reports to Ontario really makes sense. Because you know you've gotten not comparable as your report for RN, and that automatically qualifies you to go back to school for bridging. But the fact that you have passed your Nclex RN from US and you have presented it back to CNO in Ontario, they will take that result of your RN to bridge any of the educational gaps that you might have had before, and that solves everything with Ontario. Okay, for another province, I just want to cite this one as an example so that people will just be informed and they will be able to choose wisely when they're adding their application, is Alberta. Alberta is a unique province. I will use that word unique, because everything about them is totally different. If you have gotten somewhat comparable or not comparable, 100% of time, my dear, you are going back to school in Alberta. Plus the fact that it is a province that you can't escape providing them with proof of English. So when it comes to proof of English, you can either satisfy this province by either writing IELTS or CELBAN 1. Secondly, you must have studied in Canada, then they will take it from you that you've satisfied English requirements, or you must have worked in Canada. It might not be in Alberta, but in another province as a registered nurse for minimum of 1,125 hours. Although this was before, they just removed this requirement as of last month, October. So now you don't have to provide 1,125 hours, but they still need you to provide proof of English, either in form of CELBA, IELTS, or study in Canada. So now, if you have gotten not comparable or somewhat comparable for your RN, my dear, you are going back to school for bridging. Now imagine in Alberta, we have just one college that is offering this bridging program, meaning all the towns that we have within Alberta, you have to be on a very long queue before you can even get admission. Just imagine the stress. And if you are not living where this college is sited, that means you have to leave your family behind. You have to travel out of that town. That is another expenses. Now talk of the school fees. The school fees for international students for bridging program is very expensive. Plus you are leaving your family. What about the mental stress? So my dear, please, by the time you are choosing your province, always choose wisely. I'm not saying you can't choose Alberta, but you can just transfer. There's another thing we call transfer of license. If you can explore provinces that are lenient with international students like Newbrunswick, Ontario, and you have passed, all you just need to do now is to transfer from one province to the other, rather than you making Alberta your first choice, please. So those are the things I just need to quickly discuss regarding the application. So before I end this video, people have been asking me, is there agency in Canada that recruits people just the way they do in UK and US and other countries? I will not say yes and I won't say no, because things are changing recently. Before, Canada is not a country that really recruits health workers like that. But because of things that are changing, COVID rates getting high, falling, going high again, so this has really made the number of health workers needs to have greatly increased. And now we now have agencies that are recruiting nurses from other countries, though they were not recruiting them into Canada as RN, but they are recruiting them in as a personal support worker or healthcare assistant. All of these are the same. It just depends on what each province is calling their own. Some province call them healthcare assistant, some call them healthcare worker, some call them personal care assistant, some personal support worker. It all means the same thing. So by the time this agency hire you in, then you have to work for them for a certain number of years as personal support worker. But along the line, you might be fortunate to have cleared your Nclex RN. Then you can now make another agreement. So in the comment section, I'm going to be dropping an email of one of the agency that I recently get to know online. She's into recruiting international nurses. So all you just need to do is to email them, but the only clause there is you must have completed your NNAS application before these people can actually process your immigration papers. So if you have not done your NNAS, this offer is not for you. And that is why I've said in the beginning that if you are already planning, dreaming of coming to Canada, why not start your NNAS application? Start as soon as possible. And by the time your NNAS reports will be out, possibly you might have been fortunate to get an agency that will bring you into Canada. So in my next video, I'm going to be addressing the various pathways that people can actually explore to move into Canada. Please don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so that each time I drop a new video, you'll be the first person to get notified. You know, I love you all, and I'll see you next. Stay safe and remain blessed.